Hello, everyone. Welcome to our monthly client services webinar. My name is Victoria O'Connor. I'm one of the counselors here at Genesis. And I also have my co-presenter here, Noelle, who will jump on here in a little bit. Before we get started, we have a few announcements and things to go over before we start this webinar. As a reminder, this presentation is for educational purposes, and we ask you to please consider your own situation and safety concerns before putting into practice any of the ideas that we talk about today. Another few notes about safety. Please be sure to watch this in a safe place where only safe people can hear it. You might also consider wearing headphones to help ensure that no one else around you can hear what you're watching. And remember to clear your browser history as well after watching this video. If somebody is monitoring your computer or your phone browser history, it might be a good idea to clear that out. If you're watching this live Zoom webinar live and you need to leave quickly, remember that you do have to click end a couple of times and close the Zoom page if you need to leave quickly for safety reasons. Confidentiality is still really important during these webinars, and we ask that you please do not use the chat feature on Zoom. If you do use the chat feature, your name and comment will be seen by anyone watching the live video and the video recording on YouTube later. If you're watching this on YouTube, if you leave any comments on that YouTube page, your name and comment will also be seen by anyone else who watches the video. And so we ask that you please don't make any comments. If you need to get a hold of us about any questions that you might have, we ask that you get in touch with us directly. So here's our contact information here, and we'll have this at the end of our presentation as well. But if you do have any questions, please contact us. We will not respond to any comments or questions left on the YouTube page. So you can see Victoria, my information here, and Noelle, both of our phone numbers and emails are here. This webinar is not meant to be a replacement for crisis support. So if you are in a crisis situation, if you need help with emergency safety planning, or if you are looking for emergency shelter due to domestic violence, please call our 24-hour hotline number. That is 214-946-4357. If you would like to sign up for counseling at Genesis or want to talk to a counselor about your situation, you can also call our outreach number at 214-389-7700. We also have some other hotline numbers here for you as a resource if needed. The National Domestic Violence Hotline number is here. They also have a chat feature on their website. So if it was not safe for you to talk to somebody to call for safety planning support, you can chat with somebody at their website, which is www.thehotline.org. There's also the number for the National Suicide Hotline here. And these are all good phone numbers to have saved in your phone just in case you might need them in the future. Okay, so today's topic, we're going to be talking about healthy and unhealthy coping skills. I think this is a really important topic. We talk a lot about coping skills here at Genesis in our counseling groups and in our trauma treatment. Coping skills are really, really important and foundational in the treatment of trauma. And what we find is that sometimes coping skills can be more on the healthy side, and maybe sometimes they might tend to be more on that unhealthy side. And so we're going to kind of talk through what some examples of healthy and unhealthy coping skills are, and also we'll be practicing some at the end of this webinar too. So kind of a brief introduction about coping skills. Remember, coping skills are any activities or actions that a person takes to manage overwhelming emotions or symptoms. We all are doing things to help us cope throughout any day. You know, all of us, right? We all have situations that happen where we're doing something to manage our emotions or our feelings, even if maybe what you're doing, even if you're not aware that what you're doing is a coping strategy. So, throughout your workday, you might feel some frustration or you might feel some sadness, and you're doing things to help manage those feelings in a given day. And even, when you're home talking with friends or family, right? lots of different emotions can come up, and we're doing things to help ourselves cope. Um, so some coping skills might be a little bit more formal, like, okay, I'm conscious of this, I'm going to sit down and journal, whereas others might be a little bit more kind of unconscious, like, okay, I'm telling myself a positive thought that I don't really realize I'm doing that, but that's really a coping skill. So, unhealthy coping skills are those activities or actions that someone's taking to manage those feelings that may end up leading to more longer term negative consequences. Typically, these unhealthy coping skills, it might feel good quickly. You might feel good fast and it feels good. You're getting a quick relief from what's bothering you. But this might lead to more problems then in the future. And so that's typically what unhealthy coping skills are. Versus healthy coping skills, these are going to be things that are going to lead to more longer lasting positive outcomes. And these healthy coping skills, maybe they don't feel as quickly relieving in the moment as maybe an unhealthy coping skill might. Um, but it's still going to help you down the road and even help you maybe just not quite as quickly as some of the unhealthy coping skills. Um, we'll see in a second when we talk more about healthy coping skills. I think that's what a lot of people think is like, well, that's not going to help me as fast. But um, what we find is that the more practice you have with healthy coping skills, that you might actually get that more quick relief, and you might actually find that it is helping fairly quickly. You just might have to practice at it, or take some time to adjust to this new way of coping if you've been using something else. Okay, so we're going to look at some unhealthy coping skills, and I'm going to talk about why some of these things might be unhealthy. So first we have alcohol and or drug use. Definitely, this can be a potentially unhealthy coping skill. Um, the more somebody is turning to alcohol or drugs to feel good, this might even lead to some dependence or even some addiction presentations. And so it could be the case that the more that I'm drinking, the more I'm feeling good. And that ends up becoming the only way that I can feel good. And I'm depending on that alcohol to feel good. So, this would be an example of when this is becoming an unhealthy coping skill. Um, this also, alcohol and drug use could potentially also be used by an abusive partner to discredit their partner in the future. So maybe a victim of domestic violence who is using alcohol or drugs to cope, maybe if it's not at that problematic level, he might come around and later say, well, she's using, marijuana, or she's drinking, she has a drinking problem, and that could actually be used against her later on. And so that's again another way that this could be a potentially unhealthy or unhelpful coping skill. The next one is overeating. Eating problems can be a symptom of trauma. And so maybe somebody like has less of an appetite because of the trauma that they've experienced, or maybe their appetite is more increased, or maybe they find that they're turning to food to feel good, or food can be really comforting. However, overeating can lead to some problems for sure with health consequences. Overeating can also become even a way of like, this is the only way I feel good. And so, again, that becomes kind of addictive or dependent on that food to feel good. So, definitely eating can also be potentially an unhealthy coping skill, too. Overeating, that is. Of course, everybody needs to eat and getting that nourishment that you need, but when it becomes to a level that it's causing problems with your health, definitely we want to talk about that then. The next unhealthy coping skill is like procrastination or avoidance. I do want to highlight here that avoidance is a trauma symptom, and this is one that makes a lot of sense. After somebody experiences a trauma, nobody wants to think about that thing that happened. And it's very normal to try to avoid those reminders or places or people that remind you about what happened. That's normal. This can become more of an unhealthy coping skill when it does start to interfere with daily functioning or when it starts to cause problems. So, for example, if somebody is avoiding driving, because there was a lot of reminders about the abuse that happened when driving. Maybe, in some situations, maybe that doesn't cause problems, but if somebody is needing to take their children somewhere or drive a family member somewhere, and they're not able to do that because they're avoiding that driving, that could potentially cause some problems or interfere with daily life. Um, Another example of avoidance could be like maybe something that makes you really anxious and you kind of put it off or procrastinate or avoid thinking about this task or avoid the task altogether. That could also definitely lead to some unhelpful situations or some more problems in the future. For example, maybe if I was feeling really anxious about this presentation today, and every time I went to create this presentation, if I just thought, oh, this is too much, I'm too anxious, I'm just going to worry about it later, the more I do that and the more I put it off, that could potentially lead to some problems where maybe I don't have a very good presentation once I get around to it, or maybe it feels so overwhelming when I do get to it, that it's not my best work. And so that's an example too of how procrastination and putting things off, avoiding can lead to some problems. Okay, the next example is social withdrawal. Again, this is one that makes a lot of sense with victims of domestic violence, that maybe their partner isolates them more from supportive people. Um, or in their situations, maybe they're feeling a lot of shame or embarrassment about what happened. And so they're naturally just kind of withdrawing from people. But this can sometimes lead to some problems. We humans are really connected beings. We like connection and we thrive on that connection with others. And so the more isolated you are, the more you're withdrawing and not reaching out for social support, that can actually lead to some more mental health outcomes and concerns and effects. So maybe lowering your self esteem or even creating some symptoms of depression, for example. And so that withdrawal can actually lead to some more problems. We also know that women who are more isolated from supportive people tend to be more vulnerable to an abusive partner's power and control tactics. And so maybe the more that he's isolating her and she starts to isolate herself or withdraw from others, that's going to make her more vulnerable to abuse. And so, if possible, we really encourage clients to reach out for support, whether that's a place like Genesis, or if there's a safe friend or a safe family member to reach out to, as long as somebody has one or a few connections, that can be really, really helpful. Okay, the next example here is self harm. Definitely somebody who is feeling more numb or somebody who is feeling a lack of control in their life. It could feel really good for that person to engage in some self harming behaviors as a way to feel good or a way to feel some sort of control. However, this can absolutely become an unhealthy coping skill really quickly, and it's a really dangerous coping skill. If somebody is engaging in cutting behaviors, they could accidentally cut too much or too deep when they didn't really mean to. Or if somebody is engaging in self harm, they might accidentally do something that they didn't intend to do. And so, this is a really potentially dangerous and definitely an unhealthy coping skill that we want to talk about if that's happening for you. And then finally, this last category, I just called it risky behaviors. This could be maybe things like gambling or shopping or even social media use. Um, these are definitely strategies that can be used for coping to feel good, but they can also be things that maybe somebody becomes more reliant on. And there can definitely be some negative consequences of these things when there's too much of it happening. So, for example, gambling, if somebody is gambling too much, that could lead to severe financial consequences. Gambling is actually also considered an addiction in our mental health world, and so that could even become a problem where they feel like they can't control that behavior. It's becoming compulsive, where I feel like I have to shop or I feel like I have to look at social media in order to feel good, and that can definitely lead to some consequences and some not so helpful situations. Noelle, was there anything else that we should add on this slide?
No, I think you covered it really well. And yeah, I just wanted to again reiterate what Victoria was saying about some of these could be symptoms of trauma that you're experiencing. And so if you're recognizing yourself using some of these, we don't want you to take away from this like feeling ashamed of that or feeling bad, but maybe just some recognition of both the role trauma is playing, and then also just recognition of, maybe these are things that they're working in the sense of helping you feel better, but in the long run, maybe aren't going to help you out the way that you're hoping that these coping skills will.
Yeah. So let's look at some healthy coping skills now. This is a really brief list of some examples. And like I said in the beginning, we talk a lot about coping skills in our groups and things at Genesis. And so if you're noticing as we're going through this that maybe you're wanting some more support with coping or you're wanting to learn some more healthy coping skills, I really encourage you to reach out to us or attend our groups if you haven't already, to learn some other coping skills and to practice some of these too. So one type of healthy coping skill is relaxation techniques. This can include a lot of different things, like for example, deep breathing, guided meditations, grounding exercises. Maybe it's an imagery exercise, like for example, picturing a peaceful place or a calming image. These are all really helpful coping skills for someone who's feeling more anxious or someone who's feeling more on edge, especially if you're feeling a lot of body sensations or symptoms like your heart's racing fast. Some of these things can help in your body to calm that nervous system so you're feeling a little bit more relaxed and a little bit less anxious. Um, this is one where like sometimes people say, well, if I just take some deep breaths, like that's not going to help me that much. But I would really encourage and argue that actually breathing can be really helpful. And you might just have to train your body and really practice at that, for your body to learn that deep breathing. Also, if you're just taking like quick breaths, like just normal, that's not going to have the same effect as a really long and deep breath. And so we did a whole webinar and video in the past on the benefits of breathing and deep breathing. So I really encourage you to check that out if you haven't seen that already. If you are somebody who um, doesn't like guided meditations or those relaxation exercises can feel kind of funny, even just find one that's like maybe 2 or 3 minutes, like something even just short. It doesn't have to be this long, hour long, I'm going to sit here and meditate and clear my mind. That might be really, really difficult for someone. And so even it's a healthy coping skill to just play a guided meditation that's 5 minutes or less, where it's just guiding you to think about different parts of your body or guiding you to relax different parts of your body. Those quick coping skills can actually be really, really beneficial too. Distraction. This is another type of coping skill. And I'll actually talk about this a little bit in the next slide here, but healthy distraction can be giving yourself a break or just kind of giving your mind a break from something that might be bothering you. This could be, for example, like doing a puzzle or reading a book, or maybe it's watching a TV show, or even talking to a friend. Maybe you're not necessarily talking about the problem that's happening or the issue that's at hand, but just even just talking to someone about like, hey, what's going on with you? That could be a helpful distraction in that moment. Distraction is good for short-term relief. And so helping you just kind of have a break from the overwhelming feelings or the thoughts that you might be having. Just giving your mind a break and quickly distracting yourself might be a good coping skill in that moment. Movement and exercise is another healthy coping skill. Movement is actually very, very helpful in calming your body's nervous system, calming that stress response. So even something as simple as walking, if you can just walk up and down the hall or even just walk around the block when you're starting to notice that you feel really overwhelmed or anxious, that can actually have a really profound impact on your body's nervous system and can really help calm you down. It's even, something as simple as rocking in a rocking chair. Maybe you're rocking back and forth or side to side over and over again, that patterned movement, that can actually be really helpful for your brain. And exercise too could also be another way to get that movement. It doesn't have to necessarily be, an hour long run. Even if you can just get in a quick walk, or you notice you're starting to feel anxious, that you sit down and you rock in a rocking chair, those small movements can also be really beneficial. Journaling is also another type of coping skill. For a lot of people, journaling can be a way to help kind of get some thoughts out of your mind. Maybe releasing it onto paper or feeling like you can get it out of you helps like make those thoughts and feelings not feel so heavy. Almost like, okay, I have it down on paper. I don't have to deal with this anymore. So journaling can be really helpful. It can also be a way to kind of process some thoughts. And so if you notice you're having a lot of negative thoughts, even just journaling and fact checking yourself, what is the evidence for this thought? What's the evidence against this? Is this really a helpful thought that I'm telling myself? And just kind of going through those different kind of journal prompts or questions, you can really reflect and really make sense of maybe some things that are happening for you. With journaling, I definitely want to just remind everybody to make sure that you're doing that safely. If you live with an abusive partner and it's not safe for you to write things down, maybe consider, typing it out on a computer and then just erasing everything and not saving that journal entry. Even that can help you get that same sense of release and kind of getting that out of you without necessarily making it permanent to where somebody could use that against you later. Emotional release is another type of healthy coping skill. So, this is really releasing and expressing your feelings in a healthy way. I think a lot of people sometimes try to stuff down their feelings or try to avoid feelings or, just kind of like, I don't want to feel this. I'm just going to ignore this feeling. But what happens is eventually those feelings might start to build up and build up and build up to where they might explode out in a way that's not so helpful or in a way that's not really um, really good. And so, for example, maybe somebody is yelling at their dog or yelling at a coworker when that's not something that they would usually do. So, finding small ways to release your emotions, kind of like a pressure valve. Releasing that emotions in small ways. Not necessarily it has to be like this huge unleashing of feelings, but finding small ways to express your feelings can be really helpful for the long term. So maybe that means letting yourself cry when you feel like crying, letting yourself laugh, even. Laughing can also be a healthy emotional release. Maybe it's letting yourself yell or scream in a safe place. So maybe when you're by yourself in your car, you can just let yourself loose and just yell if you need to. Um, or letting yourself cry, at the end of the day after the kids are asleep, letting yourself have those 5 minutes to yourself where you let yourself have that emotional expression. Those are some healthy coping skills as well. Social support, as we mentioned before, can be really, really beneficial. And so, talking to people about what's going on, getting support from friends or family members, or coworkers, social support can be really beneficial in the healing process, and also a way to help cope when you're feeling overwhelmed or you're feeling stressed or you're having certain feelings. And again, like I said, it doesn't always have to be necessarily about the specifics of the problem or the of what's going on. Maybe you find that even just being around people or talking to people can give you that sense of support without talking about the specifics. I know that's a really hard right now with our current state of things with the COVID-19 pandemic, but finding ways to reach out to people, on the phone or text or Zoom calls or FaceTime calls, definitely finding those ways of getting that social support is really important to cope. And then finally, it is a healthy coping skill to seek professional help. Sometimes in different points of our lives, we all might benefit from having a counselor or a therapist who can help us with our coping or help us through whatever we might be experiencing. There's no shame in reaching out for support. There are people there to help you. And so definitely, reach out to professionals, go to counseling groups. Those are all healthy coping skills as well. Um, so I just wanted to spend a second talking a little bit more about like isn't healthy or unhealthy as you're starting to reflect on maybe your own coping skills. As we've been going through this presentation, maybe you've been thinking about, well, I tend to do this thing and maybe it's causing some problems. And that's okay. You know, at different points, we might find that some things are working better than other coping skills, or maybe coping skills that we used to use might end up changing and might start to become more unhealthy or may start to have some negative consequences. And so, here are some things to consider as you're reflecting on your coping skills. Some coping skills may be helpful at first, but they might start to cause more problems with continued use. So, for example, like this is distraction can be one that falls into this kind of gray area sometimes. Distraction can be a healthy coping skill sometimes, but if you're distracting yourself all the time or relying on that distraction to avoid facing any feelings or dealing with any problems that you might be experiencing, that's when it might become more unhealthy. So, for example, you know, maybe if I have a hard day at work, you know, watching a TV show, that can be a healthy distraction coping skill to kind of get my mind off of what's been going on in my day, just kind of help me, you know, focus on something else, kind of escape those problems. But if I start to, you know, binge watch TV, or if I start to, you know, isolate myself and I'm only watching TV for hours and hours a day, or starting to miss obligations or responsibilities because I'm relying on that TV, that could be when it becomes more of that avoidance. And so, definitely you want to be more mindful about distraction and really reflect on, is this helping, is this okay, or is this causing more consequences, or is this becoming a way that I'm really more avoiding something. Also, you want to consider the context of your coping skills too. So, for example, we talked about emotional release as a healthy coping skill. And it can be, right? Like, for example, letting yourself cry, that can be a really helpful, healing coping skill. But you might not be able to let yourself have that cry in every situation. So, for example, if you're at work, you might not be able to let yourself have that emotional expression of crying. That might not be an appropriate place to use that coping skill. And so, you might also find that maybe some coping skills are more healthy in some situations or contexts than others. Maybe actually at work, it might be more helpful to contain feelings and to kind of put them aside until you can deal with them more appropriately or more effectively later on. So you definitely want to consider the context too as you're considering your coping skills. Some other areas to be mindful of that I think can just be a little bit gray. You want to ask yourself if these things are really helping. Does it cause any problems? Are there potential negative consequences? This could be things like eating, exercise, you know, naps. A lot of people tell me a nap is a really helpful coping skill, or sleeping, technology use, social media use, you know, even sharing feelings. These are areas where maybe those could start to become more unhealthy when they're starting to be used a lot more, or they're starting to become more like, I have to use my technology, I have to look at social media to feel good. That could be, you know, leading to some negative consequences. Or maybe you find that you are trying to share your feelings with someone, you are trying to get that social support, but if you're sharing with somebody who's not a safe person, they're not going to be a good, that's not going to be a helpful coping skill. Maybe they're starting to use those feelings against you or to manipulate you. And that could definitely end up causing some problems later on. And so, some things to, you know, ask yourself again, does it cause any problems? Are there any potential negative consequences that could happen in the future? Is it possible that problems could arise later on? Is this really helping me? And, you know, if you're finding that it is working, maybe it is a healthy coping skill at that time, but then also just always kind of check in with yourself about your coping skills. Just kind of be mindful of, okay, is this exercise routine healthy, or is it becoming more unhealthy? Is it becoming more of a dependence or a compulsive where I feel like I can't control? I have to always be doing this exercise, or it's taking over my life. You know, those are some times where maybe you want to get some support and talk to somebody about your ways of coping. Noelle, anything else to add about coping skills?
No, I don't think I have anything to add, but I think that was all really, really helpful information.
Okay, great. Well, I'm going to turn it over to Noelle now, who's going to talk to us more about some coping skills and we're going to practice them.
Awesome. Thanks, Victoria. So we're gonna kind of do two parts for our coping skill portion today. The first thing was just to kind of reiterate on everything that Victoria just shared about just this idea that we talk about sometimes at Genesis of having a coping skill toolbox, or you could call it a self-care kit. You can really kind of call this whatever works for you, but this is the idea of having an easy way to remember what for you works as your healthy coping skills. So kind of like what we talked about today, it can sometimes be hard to know what coping skills to use. Some are good for different situations. So sometimes having either a list written out or maybe it's a box with some physical items you can use as coping skills, somewhere that's easy can be really helpful because when we are experiencing an emotional crisis or we're feeling really overwhelmed or really anxious, our brains are not as easily able to think about what's going to help us calm down or what's going to help us feel better. And so the more we kind of plan ahead and the more we're practicing our coping skills, we can be more prepared in those situations. So some people find it helpful to, if it's safe, to write down a list that they just have in their glove box in their car or in their wallet of coping skills that they can use. So thinking of some of those healthy ones that Victoria listed, like maybe journaling or taking deep breaths, or maybe it's thinking about a favorite memory, or having that little note to yourself of go on a walk. Some people, instead of maybe writing out a list, if it's safe, again, thinking of your safety, if it is safe, maybe having a little box at home that has maybe a puzzle if that's something that helps you feel calm, or has some pictures of favorite memories you have, or maybe has a favorite you have a favorite lotion or favorite scent. Just some little things like that where you're having it all in one spot together can be really helpful. And that in itself is just another coping skill, right? Of having things that are easy to use and that you don't have to think to yourself, oh, like what could I use right now when you're already overwhelmed. Um, so we just wanted to share that idea. And then, yeah, if you'll go to the next slide, Victoria. Thank you. So we also just wanted to offer one brief coping skill. You may have heard of this before, but we're going to just do a brief exercise together called the 5-4-3-2-1. This is a grounding exercise. So if you remember on the slide about healthy coping skills, one of those first bullet points talked about grounding. So that's this idea of kind of getting ourselves back in touch with where we're at this present moment. Sometimes our thoughts are really focused on the future, like the what ifs. What if this or that happens? That's where we start to feel anxious. Sometimes our thoughts get really focused on the past and like those I should have done this, and these thoughts of this went this way, and that can lead us to start feeling more depressed. So a lot of times if we can be more in the present in moments when we are safe, then that can help us calm down. And so with this picture, we just invite you right now to either notice your surroundings, or you can look at this picture, or you can think about, a similar beautiful place or somewhere that feels calm or peaceful to you. I'm going to hold up my hand just for the visual of that. So with the 5-4-3-2-1 exercise, we're going to be using all 5 of our senses. So I just want you to start with, whether you're focusing on where you're at right now or an imaginary image. First, thinking about sight. So thinking about what are 5 things that you can see. So either 5 things you can physically see. For example, in my office, I can see my computer. I can see a picture on the wall. I can see this computer screen. I can see the lamp, the phone on my desk. I can see my water bottle. Right. So just 5 things either you can see, or if you're choosing to imagine somewhere calm, it can be 5 things that you can see in this imaginary place. And then for 4, wanting you to notice 4 things that you can physically feel right now. And again, if you're imagining somewhere, it could be 4 things you could feel if you were somewhere. So if you're picturing, being at this place that you can see in this picture, I could feel the cool water, I can feel the rocks, I can feel the sand under my feet, I can feel the sun on my skin, I can feel the leaves. So that's 4. 3 would be 3 things that you can hear. So again, thinking about this image, maybe it's being able to hear some birds chirping, it's hearing the sounds of the waves, hearing the sound of maybe the leaves rustling. And if you're in your present area, maybe it's, the sounds you can hear outside the room you're in or the sounds you can hear inside the room. And then two, noticing two things you can smell. So noticing, again, with the room I'm in, maybe it's noticing the scent of a lotion that I put on, or it's the scent of, some food down the hall. I'm just focusing on that scent, those sensations right now. And then for number one, just last noticing something you can taste. And so, maybe if you're, outside, like in this picture, it's being able to taste like the salty air. Maybe it's something else and invite you now just to take a second, and now that you've had that moment to ground yourself either with where you're at right now or thinking of this calm place, just notice how you're feeling right now. um, Noticing maybe any differences in how you're feeling before, maybe feeling more calm or more relaxed. And as you're doing this, it's not really as important which sense you use for which number, right? It could be five things you can taste, or it could be five things you can smell. But just being able to use all five of those senses and really take that time to intentionally go through those can be really helpful as just a simple coping skill to have in your back pocket or to have in your self-care kit. Thank you all for joining today. And we'll just show here on this last slide our information. So you're welcome to, you can call our numbers here, or you can email us if you have any questions about this webinar. And again, if you are interested in beginning counseling services here at Genesis, you can always call our main office number, the 214-389-7700. And thanks for watching today.
Thank you, everyone. We'll see you next month.